Chapter 3 of Who Was Martin Luther King Jr. Chapter 3, Martin Gets a Job. Two churches, one in Massachusetts and one in New York, wanted Martin to become their minister. While Martin was deciding which job to take, another letter came from the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. The church, which had no minister, invited Martin to come down and preach. On a clear winter day in January 1954, Martin set out to visit the church in Alabama. On the drive, he listened to one of his favorite operas on the radio. The music in the beautiful countryside made for the 4-hour drive to pass quickly. During the drive, Martin practiced the sermon he was going to deliver the next day in Montgomery. By the time he got there, he was nervous. He was not afraid to speak in front of people. At his father's church, Martin stood up before crowds and preached. But Martin knew that if his sermon tomorrow was good, the job of minister would be his. Martin wasn't sure he wanted to live in the South. He knew that life in the North was easier for blacks and fairer. Still, the church in Montgomery sounded like a wonderful place, and he wanted to make a good impression. Should he show the people that he was smart? Should he tell them all about his education? No. Martin knew that all he had to do was the same thing he had done before in the churches: speak from his heart and help people pray. Sure enough, Martin's sermon was so good that the people at the Dexter Avenue Church asked him to become their preacher. Martin talked with Coretta. She too shared Martin's fears. Could she find a good job in the South? In the North, there were more opportunities for black women. Martin and Coretta also talked about what it would be like raising children in the South. In the end, Martin and Coretta decided to live in Alabama. After all, the South was their home, and more importantly, at the Dexter Avenue Church, Martin could help fix some of the problems of local black people. Brown versus the Board of Education. Around the same time that the Kings decided to move to Alabama, a very important case came before the Supreme Court. In Topeka, Kansas, a black third grader named Linda Brown had to walk a mile every day to get to school. Linda's father tried to enroll her in a school that was closer to home, but the principal refused. The school was for white children only. This case, and other cases like it, came before the 9 judges of the Supreme Court. On May 17, 1954, all 9 judges of the court agreed that separate schools, by definition, could not be equal. With that reasoning, the idea of separate but equal was struck down. All public schools had to accept black and white children. Chapter 4, Riding the Bus. Martin started his job as the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church on September 1, 1954. In his sermons, he persuaded church members to register to vote. Voting was one way to change unjust laws. He also encouraged them to join the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP is one of the oldest civil rights groups in the United States. It was formed on February 12, 1909. Its purpose is to help minorities get equal and fair treatment when they look for a job, buy a home, or apply to a school. These are just a few examples of civil rights. After living in Montgomery for about a year, Coretta gave birth to a little girl, Yolanda Denise. Martin called her Yoki for short. Now the Kings were a family. Only 2 weeks after Yolanda was born, something happened that changed the United States history. On December 1, 1955, a 42-year-old black woman named Rosa Parks got on a bus in Montgomery. Instead of going back to the back of the bus, she sat down in a seat at the front. The bus driver told her to move, but Rosa Parks refused, and she was arrested. Little insert on Rosa Parks here before we move on. Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was born in Tuskegee, Alabama on February 4, 1913. After Rosa's parents separated, she and her mother moved to the farm where Rosa's grandparents lived. Rosa was homeschooled until she was 11. She began high school, but she had to drop out to take care of her sick grandmother. It wasn't until after she was married that she finished high school. By 1943, Rosa had become active in the civil rights movement. She joined her local NAACP chapter in the Voters League. Rosa worked as a seamstress at the department store. She rode the public bus to and from work. After her arrest on December 1st, 1955, she spent the night in jail. Some people said that Rosa did not give up her seat because she was tired. Rosa said that they were right. She was tired of giving in. Almost 100 years earlier, the Civil War had ended and slavery was abolished. Black people were no longer slaves, but in many places, real change did not come until the 1950s and 1960s, when more black people began demanding their rights. Many people think that Rosa Parks' protest, that one little act, was the start of the modern civil rights movement. There's a couple images of Rosa Parks and her on the bus. So this was a big, big moment in the civil rights movement. So now back to the actual reading part. So after her arrest, black leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., met to discuss Rosa Parks' arrest. Martin and others came up with a plan. They would not ride the city buses to school or to work. This kind of protest is called a boycott. If the blacks of Montgomery stopped riding the buses, then the bus company would lose money. Perhaps then the government would change the laws. Monday, December 5th, 1955, was the day the boycott began. Since Monday was the start of a new school and work week, people would have to take cabs or find rides in cars. Some would even have to walk. But Martin believed the boycott would send a strong message. If black people couldn't sit wherever they wanted, they would refuse to take the bus. On Monday morning, Coretta and Martin woke up early. They peeked out the window to look outside at the bus stop. A bus pulled up. It was empty. Martin jumped into his car and drove around the city. Almost all the black people he saw were riding in cars or walking. Later, he learned some had to walk more than 10 miles to get to where they were going. The first day of the boycott was a tremendous success, but it needed to continue. People would have to give up riding the buses the next day, and the next day after that. They had to continue the boycott until the law changed. White leaders in the Montgomery city government were angry. The city buses were losing money. But still, the leaders did not want to change the laws. Instead, they tried making things harder for black people. The police commissioner told the taxi companies to charge higher fares so that it would be too expensive for most people to take taxis. They would have no choice but to walk. But Martin and the other black leaders had a plan. They helped organize carpools. Many people, both black and white, volunteered to drive people taking part in the boycott. It was a good example of a peaceful protest. Peaceful protest, however, also could be dangerous. Martin was arrested by the local police. They said he was speeding in his car. Martin knew that he was not. The police wanted to scare him into stopping the bus boycott. Then a firebomb was thrown onto the porch of his house. Martin was frightened for his family, but that did not stop him. The boycott lasted over a year. Finally, the Supreme Court of the United States said that laws separating whites and blacks on the Montgomery buses had to end. Martin was overjoyed. Now it was time for people to ride the buses again, sitting wherever they wanted. Early in the morning on December 21st, 1956, 3 other leaders of the boycott came to Martin's house. Reporters followed the men as they walked to the nearest bus stop. The reporters shouted out questions. Cameras flashed in Martin's face. This was a momentous day. When the bus arrived, Martin and the other leaders got in. The reporters followed. Martin took a seat right up front. On his face was a great big smile. We have a little bit of time to start Chapter 5. Chapter 5, a peaceful fight. Integrating the buses in Montgomery had worked, but Martin Luther King Jr. knew that this was just the beginning. Martin and the other black leaders met in Atlanta, Georgia. They formed a civil rights group called the Southern Christian Leaders Conference, or the SCLC. On February 14th, 1957, Martin became the head of the group. In the South, civil rights leaders faced growing violence. One man's home was bombed. So were several churches. Then a service station and a cab stand were bombed. Martin urged everyone to remain calm. "We must not return violence under any condition," he said. He knew that his advice was hard to follow. Martin's speeches made him famous in Montgomery. Wherever he went, thousands of people showed up to hear him. People even ran up to him on the street to ask for his autograph. On May 17, 1957, Martin spoke at a gathering called the Prayer Pilgrimage in Washington, D.C. The march took place on the 3rd anniversary of the passage of Brown versus the Board of Education. On the day of the march, thousands of black and white people gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial. The speakers asked the government to pass a civil rights bill. This bill would guarantee all people in the United States equal rights under the law. An important part of the Civil Rights Bill would be to make sure every adult citizen was allowed to vote. At the prayer pilgrimage, Martin said that that was the most important request to President Dwight Eisenhower. Sorry, let me reset that sentence. At the prayer pilgrimage, Martin said that was the most urgent request to President Dwight Eisenhower. While Martin was marching and speaking, Coretta was busy running the King household. On October 23rd, their second child, Martin Luther King III, was born. Martin said of Coretta, "I am indebted to my wife, Coretta, whose whole love, sacrifices, and loyalty, neither life nor work would bring fulfillment." By this time, Coretta wanted to become much more involved in the movement. Martin, however, preferred that she stay at home raising the children. And I'll read this little excerpt and then we'll stop. So it's called the 15th Amendment. In 1870, the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution gave male U.S. citizens who were 21 or older the right to vote. Women, both white and black, did not get the right to vote until 1920. But all over the South, black people were still kept from voting. They were told that they had to pay a poll tax before they could vote. Many were too poor to pay. Some blacks had to take tests to prove that they could read and write. If they couldn't, they were turned away. They could not vote for president. They could not vote for Congress. They could not vote for local leaders. Not only was this unfair, it was against the law. That is where we'll end for today in the middle of chapter 5.